Welcome to Kaleidoscope, a conversation about arts, creativity, and the intersection of ideas. We are bringing together faculty from the Institute of Creative and Collaborative Arts at Eastern Kentucky University. I'm Jenny Whitehouse, your host for Kaleidoscope. I'm director of the ICCA School of Communication and a professor of multimedia journalism. I'll ask our guests to introduce themselves and their area of expertise.
Hi, I'm Shannon McCarthy. I'm a graphic designer and associate professor of graphic design of ICCA School of Art and Design.
Hi, I'm John Strada. I'm a senior lecturer in communication studies in the ICCA School of Communication.
Thank you both for joining us for today's podcast to discuss this concept of advocacy and how it influences you in your discipline. For me, as a journalist, advocacy of truth and access to information for everyone is very important. Shannon, what does advocacy mean in your discipline?
So the great thing about graphic design is that it's multifaceted. So it can mean many different things, anywhere from really making it a visual statement and supplying that on multiple materials to being like right into the meat of it. But generally, I would say that design is a visual aspect and help communicate those messages. And so we could use that for poster design or shirt designs. We can use those for conferences or different type of exposition, something like that. So it's really about getting the truth out there and visually telling it boldly.
Your students produce a lot of messages for people that really share the tone of a given event. Do you see that as a form of advocacy?
Absolutely. It's, graphic design is a delicate balance where it can go more into the artistic side and having more of a personal reflection, or it can go more to the client side. So it's really about the client's voice that they're trying to get across and the client message as well to tell their story.
Thank you, Shannon. John, advocacy is central to your work in communication.
Yes.
Sometimes persuasion and advocacy can be misinterpreted as manipulation. How do you respond to that?
Yes, it can. As with many things, advocacy in and of itself is not good, it's not evil, it's a tool. Advocacy is building relationships. Advocacy is creating messages so people can get the things they want and they need. And as with anything, that can be used or it can be misused. In the classroom, we often tell students, listen, the same things we're teaching here, powerful people, politicians, influencers can use these same things. You can use these same tools. You can be astute in the same ways others can be. And knowing the ins and outs of advocacy are what's important. Because once you know how advocacy works and the little bits and pieces, you can start then with good intention, using that for good rather than evil. There are those who do use it for nefarious purposes. We've seen it in World War II with propaganda, especially coming out of Nazi Germany. And again, hopefully as people understand it and see what it is, it's not vilified. It's brought up in a way that people respect. Because everybody should have a voice. Everybody should be able to try to get the things they need to live a good life.
If people are advocating, though, for things in a self-centered way, it can be manipulative. How do you convince people that your particular position is one that is being used for good?
Of course, self-advocacy. We're constantly trying to understand the things we need for ourselves. We have the right to autonomy. We have the right to get the things we need to be healthy and happy. Those are things we're constantly fighting for. But we don't live in an individual world. We live in a world with other people. We live in a mass society where we're going to have to negotiate a little bit. We're going to have to sit down and figure out, how can what I need match up with what you need? Is there a way that we both can get something out of this? Ethics are baked into this whole conversation. I would like to assume everybody approaches everything ethically, but I know better. Sometimes people just want what they want. They get greedy, the nature of humans. And if we can sit down and start understanding each other, part of advocacy is understanding what you need, and part of it is understanding what the other person needs. The same as anything in basic persuasion or basic relationship creations.
Shannon, you have been working a great deal in your own work on advocating for children. Can you talk about the children's books you've created?
Yes, so I have 2 children's books, Some Days Feel Stormy and The Mismatched Kids, and they're both about big emotions and how to think about them, understand them, and hopefully work through them and find some positive ways to relate to them as well. So this really started because of my lack of education with big emotions, and it being, I think, more of a newer relative term. This comes from a non-parent. I am a cat mom, so please take that as with grace as you can. But understanding more about those types of emotions that we've all had as children, but perhaps ourselves and our parents might not have been able to understand. But with new education, now is the time to really understand that and soak it in and bring it to more of the masses or the community, to Appalachia, and to understand those resources and how to talk about them more. So with Some Days Feel Stormy, it's more about, it doesn't have to be a physical type of storm, right? It's about how you feel. And that can be anywhere from feeling sad or angry. Those big emotions are sort of all-encompassing. It can be overstimulation as well. And so, what are some happy thoughts? What are some grounding techniques that evolve around happy thoughts that can bring you more centered and at peace and calm? So the book goes through different avenues to do that. So that can be textile experiences, that can be imagination, that could be just positive thoughts, and remembering that more or less that you are not alone in this and that you can find others that can relate to those. And then with the Mismatched Kids, that's the second book, and those are actually like little monsters. And with that, it's just really about that everyone is different, and within that uniqueness, we should celebrate that across the board.
What I appreciate there are a lot of flavors of advocacy, and some of advocacy is advocating for people who have no voice. And in some case, that's children, it may be animals, could be the environment. And we need people to go out and understand what it is. That's even harder. It's easy for me to know what I want. It's harder to see what others may need and be able to understand that, then communicate that need to somebody else on behalf of that other person. We see that judges are often called advocates in the same way, and I can see that art and that creation really tying in, helping to give that voice to those who have none.
Thank you.
What, Shannon, do you want kids to understand about their own voices through the process of this book? How are you trying to help children advocate for themselves?
I'm trying to have them understand just big emotions in general, and that it's 100% okay to have them, but it's also valuable to understand them. So we experience them, but we have to also process them, and that can be really scary to do. And that could be something like those big emotions of like anger or depression or overstimulation, or it can be just feeling alone and lost in this world. And so again, how to understand them, but also how to talk about them. So how do we bring up that conversation, or maybe starting to even observe others and be like, well, like, can I help them, or do they have similar things like me that we can like start expressing and conversating about? How do I bring this up to my parent? But honestly, making them feel like they are not alone in any of this, and that others have experienced it, and we just need to come together and start a conversation to help advocate for each other.
Recently, we enjoyed First Amendment Week. And I was wondering, you had an art exhibit with your students where they used their own designs and their own ideas as a form of advocacy. Is there a color theory? Is there a theoretical foundation for the choices we make when we choose to advocate? How do we express that with design?
So that can really be for, I think, honestly, what you're trying to advocate for. With that particular exhibit, it was either the theme of First Amendment in general or it was protest. And so a lot of the students went more towards the protest feel. And with that, at least within design, we talk about the color theory of what are like the powerhouse colors. And a lot of the times you have black, you have white, and then you have a power punch. And so usually that is red or perhaps yellow, but it's a pop color that helps with the neutral understanding of the balance of black and white. And so you'll see in a lot of those pieces the vibrations of like black or a neutral like white or creams, and then a pop color to help emulate those. Also with that, you want to think about perhaps bold type, something that really catches the eye, but more so hand-done type. So anything that looks handwritten and has that energy of humanistic quality really can grab the attention, because when it's more humanistic in quality, it grabs the heartstrings more, that like someone actually made this. It wasn't made by a computer, or it wasn't printed for like 1,000 people to use. This is a singular person with a voice that wants to be heard.
Yeah, as you sit here talking, I think about, and a core to advocacy is connecting with other people. And what I'm hearing a lot is the way that art can stimulate those connections. And maybe even from correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like the artist is trying to put some of who they are out through the art in order to be understood.
I would definitely say for advocacy's sake, yes. Artist or designer, they're trying to put their voice forward within this theme. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And being understood can be part of that message. Whether you're sitting down at a table with somebody and trying to be understood, maybe in a more business sense, that's one thing, but how do you put an advocacy message out when you're not sitting at the table? And how do you grab somebody with pathos, ethos, or logos, basic areas of persuasion? And I could really see that as something that goes beyond even just the initial conversation. It's there, it's present.
Can I give an example?
Of course.
So with the First Amendment Week, for this year, because this was a new adventure, I decided to design the materials. I wanted to capture the eyes of all students. So though most of the students that entered were like art and design based, it was open to all of campus. And so I wanted to give a welcoming expression to capture the eye. So in the graphics that I've completed, I added more of symbolic understanding. So there was a picture of a cat in there. There was also a gun. There was something that looked like a branch. So though I have my theories and philosophies about why I put them in, I wanted to be a little bit more open for people to capture. So an example here is for the cat that I put in. Some people might think that would be more for like animal rights, right? Or adopting. Well, for me, it was actually personally related to the Pussy riots that were several years ago for a certain precedent. And so that was my understanding, but I wanted to leave it open for interpretation. The gun, for me specifically, was about gun control and how we should have less guns in the United States. But for those that, think guns should be more applied to their daily lives, they have that right to protest that and to advocate for that, so that's why that's there. For the branch itself, that was more for, that could be for nature, but it was more for religious rights. So like, what does the meaning of, the crown that Jesus is wear, or like the materials that he was hung on, the big cross, it was made, of wood. Or so I remember. So it's been a while. But, all those things mean something to me, but I want to leave them open enough for interpretation that others could be like, oh, they put a gun up there. That's great. Like, I believe in gun control. Or like, oh, I want more guns. Yeah, let's rock this. I want to just leave that open for them.
Yeah, and really advocacy as a tool is not partisan. It can be used by anybody to express what they need or what they want or how they're going to interpret something. I do think, going back to your original question, it gets vilified. Especially there in the realm of advocacy, you might think of raising awareness, activism, protest. They're in the same family, but they have little nuances of difference. And if they're clumped together, I can see where that can be seen as, oh, advocacy is bad. This is just people speaking up. But everybody should be speaking up, speaking out, asking for what they want, asking for what they need, building the relationships. There's nothing partisan about that. There's nothing wrong about asking those things.
You talked a second ago, John, about ethos, pathos, and logos.
Yes.
As it relates to advocacy. Now, those are terms that get used in a lot of different contexts. How do you see those terms playing out in advocacy?
All three of them, just to go back and explain, we're talking about logical appeals, emotional appeals, and appeals that are based around the person making the ask. And all three of them play a role in persuasion, all three of them play a role in advocacy. If you as an advocate come in and you're prepared, you're knowledgeable, you have trustworthiness and expertise, people are going to listen. They're going to take you seriously. Logical appeals, having facts, information on your side, well-researched, well thought out, good sources, but emotion plays a role too. There's a reason these sad puppy and kitty commercials work, because it draws to their heartstrings. And some of it depends on the audience. Clearly, some people are more persuaded by emotion, some more by logic, some really attach on to people. Advocacy is not one size fits all. It's really a negotiation between the advocate and the audience, whether that's a big audience, whether that's an individual, whether that's somebody looking at the art collection. So there's a lot of fluidity that's built into that whole process.
Credibility, of course, of the speaker, of the audience becomes very important, because the audience knows when the speaker is not being genuine and real. How do you help, Shannon, your students be true to themselves and embrace their own story as they communicate what they believe?
That is a challenging aspect, I think, for designers, especially how we run classes here, in that we are, or at least how I run, everybody's different, but I run that we support the client. So what is the client's voice? So it's all about the research, right? And who to have for the intended audience, what's going to be the best way to approach them. Is it through pandering towards a sadness, right? Like, let's help the puppies and the kittens, let's have them have like frowns and be in the wet rain. Or is it be like, no, they're happy in sunshine, like provide that for them, So, I always want students to have a little bit of themselves in their work, but designers, that's not necessarily our role. Our role is to market towards an idea for the client. But for their personal work, which I always encourage as well, it's to have that sort of soul connection with them. So what are they trying to get across, and how, like through type or color, or even the way that they illustrate or use photography, how could they develop that to reach those goals?
President McFadden was here recently talking to our public relations students, and one thing he encouraged them to do was to always work for organizations that share your values. And I as I think about that, I think that has a lot to do with the integrity of what you're advocating for. That if you believe in what you're advocating for, then the message is going to come off truer. It is less likely to be perceived as manipulative. We want honest communicators. John, how do you help students be honest when maybe others don't want to hear their message?
You can't control the other person. I think that's the first part. You can control you can control your reactions, you can control your preparedness, and you have to be prepared to be in a situation where somebody may just say no. But at the same time, you can come in authentic, you can come in prepared, you can come in well-spoken and well thought through in what you have to say and put your message on the table. A good advocate, a good person in persuasion or negotiation is going to sit down and understand who their audience is, whether you're buying a car, it's a job interview, business deal, whatever. And so that's going to help too, if you know where the other person's coming from, or if you can build that relationship. Again, the relationship building comes back again in advocacy. Who are they? What are their values? What are the common points we have? What are some anchors we can put in together and maybe start at that point and move forward? You may not get 100% consensus, but maybe you can find some place at least that's a starting point. It's a conversation. And coming in as genuine, unless somebody's just completely hostile to you in the first place, that goes a long way. I would guess, this is just me saying, most people want to find some way to work with somebody or to get what they need and make sure everybody's getting what they need in most cases. Again, exceptions exist, but
we have been considering the challenges in journalism with the presumption of alternative facts, which essentially is creating an alternative reality, and the lack of having a common ground. I was intrigued, Shannon, when you were talking about you want people to bring what themselves to art and to interpret it. What do they see? In advocacy, though, most often, as you've been talking about in promoting on behalf of clients, we're talking about people actually not necessarily sharing your views, but looking at your message and understanding what you mean. Sometimes if people don't want to hear with what you have to say, they're going to label it as just wrong and say, I believe in an alternative truth. How do you help, again, students work through those challenges?
I mean, I think it's the same as what John was saying, right? It's in the eye of the beholder, really. I mean, if they want to believe that, there can be an amazing graphic for a smoking campaign, but I won't give it a second glance because that's not something I believe in, right? So it's really hard to do that. And I think it's coming back to what you said before about our President McFadden, is that like working for a company or doing work for a client that you believe in their message really helps to bring that bond together. And so, again, for me personally, I couldn't work for certain companies, or nor I would work for them. I don't care how much they would pay me, because that is where my morals lie. I have ethics, I have morals, and I believe in invoking those, and that's a part of my advocacy. And I would encourage students to do the same. And so they can be passionate about a lot of things, but if they're dead set on not wanting to work for someone with a certain message, then don't do it. And that's their right to say no, and still have that right as of right now. So
yeah, and I really think about I have to think about this in terms of politics, because that's what's really in our face these days, and it's incredibly politically expedient to think about the world in simple terms. If you can boil the world down to good and bad and right and wrong and yes and no, then you can pick a side and easily argue from it. But we live in a world of nuance. We live in a world that's not that simple. And in my mind, some of the facts, or the fake news, the fake facts that are being created, are just there to fill in the blank, to create that world that's utterly simplistic and yes, no, black, white. And they deny what actually exists in the world, the nuance of the world, the actual facts and bits and information in the world. If you want to persuade somebody, you don't want to get them to think too hard about what you're persuading about. You want them to see the loud radio and the cool colors on the car rather than thinking about the price and the other things. But advocacy opens up those nuances. Here are the little things that you need to think about. Here are the little bits and pieces that actually create what's going on. It's not this fake simplistic world.
Well, I want to thank you both for this conversation today about how advocacy gets lived out. I want to thank Aaron Jones for producing this podcast. I'm Ginny Whitehouse, host of Kaleidoscope. You're listening to the Eastern Progress Media Network.